Just ahead, another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm Executive Producer Michael Yaffee.
Michael, a pleasure to be with you again this week. Economics on the Table with Stephen Moore, the Chief Economist of the Heritage Foundation. You've read many of his columns in the Wall Street Journal. He has the notion that President Donald Trump should be awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. Yes, you heard me right. We're going to talk to Stephen Moore about that and many other things as far as the economy of the country is concerned. We invite you to pull up a chair, put an ear on the radio. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages.
Here's a special message for those of you who owe the IRS at least $10,000 or more in back taxes. The IRS has special programs in place that could eliminate or reduce your tax debt by thousands of dollars. Call the Federal Tax Management Helpline that has been set up for you, 800-267-1344. Stop the wage garnishments, levies, and tax liens now. Once you've qualified and enrolled, the IRS will stop all the collection activities against you. These unique programs have been allocated to help the economy and significantly reduce or eliminate your tax burden. The IRS is currently accepting reduced settlements and other favorable programs. You may qualify for substantial savings, so get the help you need. If you owe more than $10,000 in taxes, call for free information and to see if you qualify. Take down the number now for the Federal Tax Management Hotline, 800-267-1344. That's 800-267-1344. 800-267-1344.
It'll never happen to me. I'll never need help. That's what every boater thinks. But then one day, you do need help, and you have no way of getting it because you thought having an emergency locator beacon was unnecessary. You're wrong. Emergency locator beacons are effective, affordable, and they save lives. Seriously. If not for you, do it for them.
Learn more about emergency locator beacons at myfwc.com. Brought to you by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Unexpected expenses can hit anyone, and many Floridians turn to small dollar loans to manage those temporary financial challenges. When using a small dollar loan, be sure to choose a state licensed lender. Remember that borrowers have rights under Florida law, including flexible repayment options if you can't repay on time. Make sure you understand the cost and terms of the loan before you borrow, and only borrow what you can afford to pay back. For more information, go to borrowsmartfl.com. This message is brought to you by the Florida Community Financial Services Association.
This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm Executive Producer Michael Yaffee.
Always a pleasure, Michael. Another week and more politics to talk about. Stephen Moore joining us momentarily. He is the Chief Economist for the Heritage Foundation, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. You see him on TV, and he's got a lot of things to say. But I had an interesting article put in front of me that I had to give some thought to this past week.
Oh, Michael. Boy.
And we're talking about the armed services. And the headline on this article read, Recruits' Reasons for Enlisting Evolve as the War in Afghanistan Grinds On. Now, we recently passed the 17th anniversary of 9/11.
Yeah, they say, Afghanistan is America's longest war.
It is. When I started teaching at UCF and at Valencia, I was able to lecture on how Vietnam was America's longest war. I had a whole lecture under that title. And since I've been teaching, Afghanistan has, of course, nowhere near the death tolls or anything like that, but it's gone on longer. But I wanted to look at this from a different angle here. You have to be at least 17 to go down to the local recruiting station and enlist in any of the services, huh?
Right.
Well, guess what? We have people who are now 17 who weren't born when the war in Afghanistan started.
That's right.
Now, after 9/11, enlistments spiked.
Yeah.
Young people feeling that urge to serve, even middle-aged, older people wanting to get in and go do something. And the reasoning for enlisting is many 17-year-olds today, unless their parents have told them about it or they've done some reading or heard it in school, have no living memory of 9/11. I
know. Isn't that amazing to think about? And they're going to be voting next year.
The cleavage of time, you know? Mm-hmm. I don't know, 2-3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I was teaching on 9/11, and I decided to go around the class and have the students share where were you and what were you doing when you heard the news. Events happen in your life, you know. I'm old enough that I know exactly where I was and what I was doing when I heard that President Kennedy had been shot. I remember I was sitting in the FNN newsroom on the morning of 9/11 with some other news people, and we sat here and watched it happen. But these folks have no idea. They are looking for adventure. They're looking for a career. They are people without an anchor. The Army is a wonderful place for young people who have no idea what they want to do with their lives. They go in, it gives them discipline, it gives them direction, and I don't know what kind of an effect this is going to have going forward.
That's a really great question. I don't know what kind of effect it is either. It hit me that there's going to be people voting next year who weren't alive when 9/11 happened, but it didn't necessarily hit me for some reason until you bring it up now that they're going to be in the armed forces as well.
Yeah.
And to them, it's going to be harder to convince why they're fighting.
Yeah. So it's a whole new world, and it's a changing world. It is. It's just enlistees are less likely to say September 11th plays a key role in their decision to join the military.
Yeah, and how could it?
And because they really don't know, other than seeing the anniversary, if they look at the anniversaries.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm sure they do, but yeah, you and I remember it vividly.
Absolutely. And we'll see how this plays out. But there's some food for thought for you. All these years in Afghanistan, America's longest war, something to think about. Well, we're going to shift gears and focus on the economy of the country. Stephen Moore from the Heritage Foundation is going to join us in a moment. We remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And we'll continue the conversation in a moment.
Have you written a book? You can become a published author with Dorrance Publishing, the nation's oldest publishing services company. Countless authors have trusted Dorrance for nearly 100 years to bring their book to the market. Our professional team will edit your text, design your book pages, and create an appealing, eye-catching custom cover. Plus, our authors benefit from a custom book promotion marketing campaign that makes your book available where people buy books, like Amazon and brick-and-mortar bookstores. So make this free call right now to claim your free author's guide to publishing. Don't wait another day. Take one step closer to realizing your dream of becoming a published author and seeing your name in print. You've already written a book, so the next thing to do is make this free call right now to Dorrance Publishing and get your free guide to publishing. Call right now.
800-485-6003. 800-485-6003. That's 800-485-6003.
In a world of tiny tomatoes and backyard pests, one man and his better half dig deep to save backyard gardens.
Joni, stand by to upload expert videos.
Already loaded, Tom.
Wow, you're good.
You're not so bad yourself.
Tom and Joni McCubbin star in hisandhersgardening.com. Critics rave.
Tom and Joni, they really grow on you. 2 green thumbs up.
Don't miss hisandhersgardening.com.
Wow, your flowers are gorgeous. What's your secret?
It's no secret. It's Bare Advanced.
You mean these blue bottles?
Uh-huh. I protect my beauties with all-in-one rose and flower care. It's insect and disease control plus fertilizer.
Really? What's this 12-month tree and shrub protect and feed?
Oh, I use it on my trees. It kills bugs for up to a year, plus it feeds. It's that easy. Hey, where are you going?
To get my own. I want a great yard, too.
Bare Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. Always read and follow label instructions.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And Michael, at this point in the program, as promised, we are joined by economist Stephen Moore. Stephen, welcome back to the Florida Roundtable.
Hi, great to be with you.
Steve, you, of course, with the Heritage Foundation, you've written for the Wall Street Journal. And for those who may not remember your last visit, lay out a couple of your other credentials for us, please.
Well, I was senior economic advisor for Trump during the campaign, and I have a new book coming out in next month in October called Trumponomics, an inside view of Trump's America First policies. So that will be out, and it's a good kind of first-hand account of how Trump was able to turn around our economy.
Now, one of the things you have said recently is that the president ought to get a Nobel Prize for economics, and we want to hear about your thoughts.
Well, I was just doing that to sort of tweak some of my liberal friends, who said that Trump would never be able to be successful and that he'd cause a second Great Depression if he was elected and so on. And now we've got this booming economy that none of Trump's adversaries thought was possible. And it's a great tribute to Trump's policies and his wisdom that we were able to get an economy that was barely growing at 2% when Obama was president, that's now growing at 4%, and we're seeing, record numbers of jobs created, lowest unemployment rate for minorities in 50 years. We've got the construction boom that's going on all over this country, from Florida to California, is the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. So it's a great story.
And you had mentioned Obama there. Obama's trying to take credit for this good economy. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, look, if I were Obama, I'd probably try to say the same thing, because Obama, did cause a recovery. But I think what the President Obama doesn't kind of completely understand is there's a big difference between a recovery and a boom. We had a recovery under Obama. We now have the biggest boom in 30 or 40 years, where you're starting to see wage gains. Middle class workers have a lot more opportunities today. And that's not the way that it was under Obama. In fact, the day before Trump was elected, throughout Obama's presidency, at most 3 out of 10 Americans rated the economy as good or great. Now 7 out of 10 Americans rate the economy as good or great, because things have improved so much in 18 months. And I saw the president a few weeks ago, and I just said, Mr. President, this is working better than we even thought it would when we devised these plans 2 years ago. And he just smiled and said, "You ain't seen nothing yet."
Wow. Now, we still continue to hear an awful lot about China and whatnot, and their booming economy. Is it booming, and what are your thoughts? How is that affecting us?
Right now, the United States is clearly the envy of the world in terms of our economy. We're growing much faster than Europe. We're growing much faster than China and Japan, and other countries are looking at what we've done here and saying, how do we do that? So that's been a remarkable thing to watch and to behold. And it's a great thing, because Trump has cut taxes, cut regulation, got government off the back of our businesses. He's promoting American energy production, and all these things together have really created a very strong, economy that gives Trump a lot of the upper hand in these negotiations with China, because China's economy has actually stalled. Their stock market's down almost 20% this year. There's a lot of disinvestment going out of China. So that's a positive thing. We're negotiating from a point of strength, not weakness, and they're in a panic in Beijing about Trump.
So you really feel like these tariffs that Trump is imposing is not going to really hurt the American economy that much? That really is just going to bring China to the table?
It'll hurt the economy, no question about it. Anytime you put a tariff on goods and services, it means that when we buy things, you go to Walmart, you buy things from China, they're going to cost a little bit more. So sure, there'll be some pain here, no question about it. I'm not a big tariffs guy. I don't like tariffs, but in the case of China, we need to retaliate against the fact that they cheat, they steal, they are building up their military, they're becoming an adversary, not a friend in the United States. And for 30 years, we've just sat back and taken this, and now Trump is saying, no, you're going to change your behavior, and we're going to continue to impose these very, very punitive tariffs on you until you start, acting like a civilized nation. And, I talk to American businessmen and women all the time, CEOs of major companies, who say it's almost impossible to penetrate the China market. Now, wait a minute. We're supposed to have a free trade deal with China. We buy $500 billion from them. They buy less than $150 billion from us. I mean, that just doesn't work anymore.
Now, you said when you saw the president a few weeks ago, his reaction was, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Is there anything that you can share with us that you have worked with him on and planning that you feel like maybe where he's going to?
We feel like the tax cuts are still just kicking in. You know, that this spectacular tax cut that's lowered our business taxes. We're starting to see a lot of money flow in from overseas into the United States, this repatriated capital. That's a beautiful thing. And I think that this economy is still picking up momentum. And then, of course, on the trade front, if Trump can pull this off, and right now, you know, it's like trying to predict the outcome of a baseball game in the fourth inning, but right now it looks like Trump is prevailing. We got a good deal with Mexico. He's going to get a deal with Canada done in the next month or so. We're going to see, I think probably the Europeans are now talking about being more cooperative. And then if he gets something, you know, some major concessions from China, which I think he will, I don't know when that's coming, but I think he's going to win, then the economy's really going to explode.
Yeah, and there have been reports that Republicans are proposing tax cuts 2.0. What exactly is in that plan?
The main thing is just make all the tax cuts permanent. You know, as I said, you know, the tax cut has worked better than we thought. It's one of the springboards of this booming economy. So obviously we don't want to repeal any of it because it's working so well. So, but you know, it's so interesting. I mean, the Democrats in states like Florida are running on an agenda of repealing the tax cut. I mean, it's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. Wait a minute. We have a booming economy after we pass the tax cut, and you want to get rid of the tax cut? It's craziness. And, you know, I think people should ask their candidates, you know, are you going to keep these successful tax cuts in business? Because if you repeal them, then you're going to see a lot of loss of these jobs.
Now, this sounds very similar to the kind of things that Ronald Reagan did, and of course, the Democrats have spent a lot of years saying, "Oh, well, the Reagan stuff didn't work." They called it trickle down. How are we different here?
Say that again.
The Ronald Reagan program. Democrats have spent a lot of time saying it didn't work, and that Donald Trump is going down the same kind of a road. How do you analyze that?
Well, I lived through Reagan. Did you?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, what are they talking about? We had the most. The best economy in decades and decades under Reagan. The stock market went through the roof. We had, 4% growth for 7 years. We rebuilt the American economy. I think people who say that don't remember what it was like when we had 20% mortgage interest rates and 15% inflation, and the American economy was in wreckage. And Reagan rebuilt not just the American economy or American military and won the Cold War. So, I mean, Reagan was one of our greatest presidents. I mean, I don't really understand what they're talking about when they say that Reagan's program did. In fact, we borrowed a lot of Reagan's ideas because we said, look, if they worked in the 80s, as they clearly did, they can work again. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, one thing you had mentioned earlier is President Trump is pro-energy. He's putting forward policies so that we can drill for more natural gas, drill for more oil. But I know a lot on the left really don't like that because they want us to move to like 100% renewable energy. How would you respond to those on the left that want to do that?
Well, it's so funny. I was just looking at these numbers, comparing, energy costs, because you're there in Florida, right? And
right.
So I was comparing your energy costs versus California. California pays double the energy costs than you do. Did you know that? So you
Wow.
don't have, these severe, solar and wind mandates. You do use solar and wind. It's just it's not mandated. And California already has 50% mandate. They want to go to 100%. Well, if you mandate that utilities use more expensive power sources, then it's going to mean higher utility bills for people. So, this isn't something that it's just a feel-good green policy. It's going to cost your citizens a lot more money if you were to adopt these policies. So, California's crazy for doing this. I mean, they're going to. And by the way, the people who are hurt the most by those green energy mandates, of course, are the lowest income people, because it's like a regressive tax. Their utilities bills go up by 30-40%. That's a big cost to a low income family that's living on a limited budget. So we ought to get rid of all renewable energy mandates. And look, if solar and wind are price competitive, I'm all for it. But we shouldn't force feed people in buying electric power that's double as expensive as it is when it comes from coal or natural gas. And by the way, natural gas is the most plentiful, resource we have in terms of, we've got 250 years of natural gas thanks to the shale revolution, and it's clean burning, and it's abundant, and it's cheap, and it's reliable. I mean, why wouldn't we use our natural gas?
Now, if you were back in the White House still advising the president, what would you be pushing for as the agenda goes forward?
Well, I think I would tell him that, that what you're doing is working, so don't back down to the Democrats. Let's continue to move forward. I'd like to see immigration reform where we could we have a problem now with workers. We don't have enough workers in this country. We need the talented people who want to come here and work in the service industries and agriculture. And, so let's build the wall, let's secure our border, but let's also get a pro-growth immigration policy that brings people who want to work, not people who want to go on welfare, and not people who want to come in illegally, but people who come in through the legal process and build a better life for themselves. And so we need to do that. We need to get this infrastructure bill done so we can, rebuild some of our infrastructure. We need pipelines. We need LNG terminals. We need all sorts of infrastructure. We have to help redo our ports and things like that. So there's a lot still on the agenda, but, Trump can certainly take a bow right now. That's why I said he deserves the Nobel Prize. I mean, nobody thought that what has happened was possible, and yet here we are 18 months into his presidency, and we're just seeing, every time I think the economic news can't get better, it does.
So do you think this 4% growth will continue?
I think, it will for 2 or 3 or 4 more quarters. And the only thing that's really, I think, a constraint on that growth is whether or not we can have the labor force growth, because, we don't have enough workers. We have 7 million more jobs today than people who can fill them. And if we continue to create jobs like this, we're going to have a labor shortage that gets more severe, and that could lead to some of the factories leaving the United States and going to China or India or places where where there's plenty of workers. So we need to get everybody in the workforce. We need work for welfare requirements. So, if you're on welfare, you should have to work to get the benefits. There's no more free handouts. Those kinds of things will help improve the lives of the people on welfare, but also will help the economy as well.
Let me say it one more time. A Nobel Prize in Economics for President Donald Trump. And those words from Stephen Moore. Stephen, thank you so much we know you're a very busy man, and we appreciate you spending a few minutes with us this day.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Well, we thank you kindly and wish you well, sir. Let me remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And we'll continue our conversation in a moment.
Here's a special message for those of you who owe the IRS at least $10,000 or more in back taxes. The IRS has special programs in place that could eliminate or reduce your tax debt by thousands of dollars. Call the Federal Tax Management Helpline that has been set up for you, 800-267-1344. Stop the wage garnishments, levies, and tax liens now. Once you've qualified and enrolled, the IRS will stop all the collection activities against you. These unique programs have been allocated to help the economy and significantly reduce or eliminate your tax burden. The IRS is currently accepting reduced settlements and other favorable programs. You may qualify for substantial savings, so get the help you need. If you owe more than $10,000 in taxes, call for free information and to see if you qualify. Take down the number now for the Federal Tax Management Hotline, 800-267-1344. That's 800-267-1344. 800-267-1344.
Florida's boating environment is always changing. New sunsets, new experiences that you won't find anywhere else on Earth. But one thing that never changes: boating while impaired by drugs or alcohol. It's illegal in the state of Florida. Boating under the influence will land you in jail, or worse, kill someone you love. It's just simply not a risk worth taking. Learn more about Florida's boating laws at myfwc.com. Brought to you by the FWC Division of Law Enforcement.
Your yard's days of being picked on are over, thanks to the science of Bayer Advanced Brush Killer Plus. Its penetrating formula is specifically designed to kill hard-to-control brush, like kudzu, poison ivy, poison oak, and wild berries, roots and all. And the concentrate product even kills stumps, so your yard never has to worry about being bullied. Bear Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. BearAdvanced.com. Always read and follow label directions.
Terrorist acts and shootings are often described as great tragedies. They are not. We live in a world so concerned with being politically correct that they're afraid to call evil what it is, evil. Man's sin nature is as old as the Garden of Eden. Many love to blame culture, poverty, or lack of education and opportunity as the problem. They may have a good or bad impact, but the big problem is sin. Acknowledging our sin nature will show us our need for a Savior who changes us from within. That Savior's name is Jesus. He came to die for the sins of all who will acknowledge their sin. Faith in Him strikes a mighty blow at evil. So quit calling man's evil acts a tragedy. They are evil and God hates it. Yet thankfully He loves us in spite of our evil and sin. Jesus not only forgives us, but gives us the want to overcome evil with good. This is Brian Wright, speaking right from my heart.
All right, crew, let's get her dug.
Honey, you want to give me a hand? I'm planting that tree, remember?
No matter how large or small your digging project may be, no matter how urban or rural, you must always call 811 before any digging project. 811 is our national one-call number, alerting your local utility companies to come out and mark any lines they have near your dig site. You must call 811 at least 2 to 3 business days before any digging project, so you can avoid hitting our essential buried utilities. This includes natural gas and petroleum pipelines, electric, communication cables, and water and sewer lines. So before you do this or this, make sure you do this. For digging projects big or small, make the call to 811. Brought to you by Common Ground Alliance.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And interesting commentary from Stephen Moore of the Heritage Foundation, a former Wall Street Journal columnist. Donald Trump and an economic...
to get the Nobel Prize.
Prize for economics, yeah.
Yeah, he thinks maybe Trump should get it. Now, he admits in our interview with him, he was kind of tweaking the left a little bit.
Yeah.
He knows it's never going to really happen, but...
It's an interesting notion. It's also, in my view, a hard sell over the short term. Meaning,
True.
In 2, 3, 4 years from now, many Americans may look back and say, gee, he actually did make things better for us. But while it's happening, how do you convince people? They're saying, well, I haven't seen any great increase in my paycheck yet.
That's true, but you have to remember they gave Obama the Nobel Peace Prize before he did anything.
Yeah, that's
so,
the truth.
Who knows what?
I wonder... I happen to agree with the Trump economic policies. I agreed with the Reagan policies, and I think what's interesting is that the opposition has not gone back to the Reagan years and tried to attack Donald Trump with the same kind of things that they attacked Ronald Reagan with.
Well, they remember Reagan was very popular and still is popular.
Yeah. But we heard all this business of trickle down doesn't work, and they've spent the last 30 years trying to convince us, as Dinesh D'Souza sometimes says, you tell a big lie enough times, people begin to believe it.
Yeah, that's very true. And there's still lots of them that say trickle down doesn't work. But even Democrats now and former President Obama have had to admit that the economy is really doing well. So they've kind of had to shift their focus, their attacks a little bit and try to say, well, the reason is because of what Obama did. But they can no longer ignore the good economy.
Yeah. And I think it's going to continue to grow. I don't see, we don't have the conditions for a stock market crash, for a major crash like we've had in the past.
I mean, there's a couple of things that could get in the way, like Stephen Moore said. The labor shortage could... Yeah. Get in the way a little bit. I'm not as concerned about that. The Fed, whatever the Federal Reserve does, if they really start hiking rates, interest rates, that could affect it.
Yeah.
And wherever these trade policies go could also affect it. But in the big term, I think it is going to continue to grow.
And there you put your finger on a point that I really wanted to talk to Stephen Moore about, and we'll get him back here and talk about this, and that is the Federal Reserve Board, created under President Woodrow Wilson, appointed members, banks around the country holding the Federal Reserve funds, and once they're on that board, they aren't accountable to anybody but themselves.
Yeah, I mean, some members of Congress have been arguing that they should be audited by Congress so many years.
And very difficult to remove them. You know, a Federal Reserve Board member would have to commit a bank robbery or a murder or something like that
right.
in order to be removed from office. When Woodrow Wilson was putting this thing together, his critics charged that he was socializing the economy, putting a bunch of dictators in charge that nobody had any control over.
Right.
And one would hope, and we've seen the friction between presidents and Fed chairman. They get a 7-year term, I think.
Well, yeah, and Trump has already criticized the Fed.
And his appointee is the chairman now.
Right.
What was worse sometimes was when a president was stuck with the appointee of a previous president that they didn't agree with. And that Fed chairman really has no obligation to do what the president wants to have done.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the Federal Reserve and the Fed chairman, like you said, they have a lot of power.
Yeah.
And you're right, the president really can't stop him.
Yeah.
So if they really want to start raising rates by a lot, the president can complain about it, but there's not much else he can do about it unless Congress passes a law that says the president can do something about it.
And I think that is highly unlikely. And the people who are on the Fed are not going to go out and commit high crimes and misdemeanors to get themselves impeached. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's a major thing, that the president and the chairman of the Fed continue to have parallel ideas about where the economy ought to be going, because the Fed chairman can derail the president very easily.
Yeah, I mean, so far they haven't raised rates. They have a little bit. They haven't raised rates too much. There is talk that they're going to soon, but it will still not be very much because they're worried about inflation, but inflation still is not a big problem even right now.
Yeah, it hasn't been. And that, of course, was a part of the Wilson reform proposal. He wanted to have an elastic economy where the money supply fluctuated with credit.
Yeah.
And, as long as we're going along those tracks and it doesn't cause a depression, and I think you put your finger on it, tiny increases.
Although there are some that believe that the Federal Reserve, I was reading earlier this week, some believe the Federal Reserve and their rate hikes back in 2000 and what they were doing helped speed up the Great Recession.
The Great Recession.
That it helped cause it. So, in the 2000s, they were raising rates, and some people think the Fed is partly responsible for that stock market crash in 2008.
Well, I wouldn't argue the point. We could talk about it a lot, but I think that they do have a point there, and that is a part of the cause.
It might be. You're right. There is a lot of speculation, but the Federal Reserve isn't perfect. There's a lot of people that believe that after the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve did the opposite of what they were supposed to after the 1929 stock market crash and made things worse.
You were exactly right, and I couldn't agree more. Before the Federal Reserve Board came along, in Mark Twain's heyday, he said that in the Gilded Age, Mark Twain said that men were living on credit like there was no tomorrow.
Right.
Does history repeat itself?
No, don't.
Where have we been?
No, don't say that.
Well, and Twain said that was an improvement from where they'd been before. Well, in any event, we shall see what happens. And
in terms of the Nobel Prize, though, I feel like, does a politician ever win the prize for economics? Or isn't it usually like a professor who has some kind of theory that's put out there?
Yes.
It would be something different if they gave it to Trump as a president.
Oh, yeah. I don't think there has ever been a politician to get a Nobel Prize for economics.
Politicians usually implement the ideas of some smart professor or something. But
it's always a theory and a model constructed,
exactly.
There were various nicknames for studying economics, and none of them were complimentary. But, in any event, well, there's lots of other things going along. We have, of course, we are in the middle of a silly season here, and
silly season.
If you think you haven't seen enough political advertising yet, my goodness, wow. it's going to increase and increase. And
we haven't seen anything yet.
Oh, my, oh, my, oh, my. But the U.S. Senate race between Bill Nelson and Governor Rick Scott, isn't it interesting? We've had the red tide for decades. And all of a sudden, it's both of these guys who have caused it. Nelson says, it's all Rick Scott's fault. And Rick Scott says, well, they never gave us any federal money to clean it up. And back and forth it goes.
Yeah. Red tide has been around before. It's not anything new. They're saying that it's worse than it has been in the past, but
I can remember 30-some years ago, closer to 40 years ago now, visiting the beaches in Sarasota when there was red tide, and there were so many dead fish on the beach, and the smell was just atrocious, and you couldn't. And this was in the 1980s, huh? You couldn't even get close to the and there went my long weekend in Sarasota.
Oh man!
So
that's a bummer.
It's people like Bob Graham and Claude Kirk and Lawton Childs. And we can go back over all these years. It has been around a long time. This is not a problem that just happened this summer.
Yeah, they're trying to argue that it's worse now. But.
Yeah, and I suppose it could be, but how come we didn't do more to find a cure for it 30 years ago or 40 years ago? This is something that they've let slide. Well, time for us to take a pause along the network line. This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And if you'll stay put, our conversation continues following these messages.
Terrorist acts and shootings are often described as great tragedies. They are not. We live in a world so concerned with being politically correct that they're afraid to call evil what it is, evil. Man's sin nature is as old as the Garden of Eden. Many love to blame culture, poverty, or lack of education and opportunity as the problem. They may have a good or bad impact, but the big problem is sin. Acknowledging our sin nature will show us our need for a Savior who changes us from within. That Savior's name is Jesus. He came to die for the sins of all who will acknowledge their sin. Faith in Him strikes a mighty blow at evil. So quit calling man's evil acts a tragedy. They are evil and God hates it. Yet thankfully, He loves us in spite of our evil and sin. Jesus not only forgives us, but gives us the want to overcome evil with good. This is Brian Wright, speaking right from my heart.
If you're in the market for a walk-in tub, stop and listen to this. Now, you can buy direct from the manufacturer and save more than 50%. You won't pay $20,000. You won't pay $15,000. You won't even pay $10,000. Boca walk-in tubs are made right here in America by veterans. We're certified and virtually 100% of our tubs are made in the USA. A Boca walk-in tub is made from gel-coat fiberglass. Other manufacturers use acrylic, which is basically plastic. We can deliver a walk-in tub anywhere in the U.S. and have it installed in no time at all. And everybody that calls right now can save $500 towards the purchase of a new walk-in tub. Call now and learn how to get a walk-in tub and save more than 50% off retail prices.
Call 800-308-4917. 800-308-4917. 800-308-4917. Again, that's 800-308-4917.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And we were talking about the U.S. Senate race, Governor Rick Scott versus Senator Bill Nelson. Both of the gentlemen have been guests on this program multiple times over the years. I have known Bill Nelson since before he was the state insurance commissioner. I've known Rick Scott all through his governorship. And this is it's a tough race. And now it seems as though Governor Scott is having to put he's putting a little bit of distance between himself and President Trump.
Yeah, it's been reported in the news lately, and there's some truth to that. He even had George W. Bush at one of his campaign events instead of Trump.
Yeah. Amazingly, it's interesting when we talk about the Hispanic vote in this state, and that is the Hispanic vote in Central Florida tends to be heavily Democratic. The older Cuban vote in South Florida tends to go for the Republicans.
Right.
And, of course, that coming out of the anti-communism, the anti-Castro days.
And both of them are really trying to go after the Puerto Rican vote. A lot of the Puerto Rican refugees from Hurricane Maria last year are still living here in Florida.
But Governor Scott, I think, took some rather extraordinary steps. He's visited Puerto Rico, 6, 7, 8 times, something like that, since the hurricane. And he's done a great deal of outreach. And there are elected Puerto Rican officials who have who are endorsing Rick Scott, some endorsing Bill Nelson. So I think that could be a danger flag for Senator Nelson. But I hasten to add that about 2 weeks ago, the Puerto Rican committee that is wanting to register voters, indicated they had several thousand, but that was across the country, and that as of maybe about 2 weeks ago, they had only registered 600 new voters in Central Florida.
Really?
Yeah.
That's it?
That's it.
That is a surprising number. I would have thought it would have been a lot more than that.
I read that one, and I said, but it was their figure.
I guess, though, they figure that a lot of them are staying with family members, and the family members might have been here for a while, and maybe they're voting, so you still don't want to offend Puerto Ricans, obviously.
Yeah. Well, Rick Scott has done a pretty good job of scoring some good numbers, actually outpolling Bill Nelson in the Hispanic vote.
Yeah, which is... in any other state, that would be very hard for a Republican to do, I think.
Yeah.
But here, because like you said, the Cuban vote definitely helps him.
Yeah. And overall in the race, generally speaking, Governor Scott has been a point or two ahead.
Yeah.
Generally within the margin of error of the polls.
Yeah, the average of the polls right now, Rick Scott is up by a little under 2 points.
Mm-hmm, which is... And there's probably about a 4-point margin of error on the thing.
Yeah.
So this one is really tight. If the Democrats are to have any hope at all of taking over the Senate, they actually have to hold on to all of the seats that they are defending and take a couple away from the Republicans. And I just don't see that in the cards.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for them to do. I mean, even... the Senate's still going to be close, though. I don't see the Republicans gaining too many seats.
2, 3, maybe.
Maybe.
5 at the outside.
Yeah.
And 5 might be a stretch.
But the Florida race is a big deal for both parties because both parties think they can win it. Like you said, it's really close. A lot of people really believe that Rick Scott's going to win this race. Yeah. It's just a big deal because Bill Nelson has been sort of a lock in that position for a while now. So
I think that the Republican advertising has had something to it when they attack him for, it's time for him to come home. He would be well over 80 if he gets another term, and be one of the longest serving members of the Senate. He's a nice man, intelligent guy. He's been here many times, but he has been in Washington a long, long time.
Right, and it's an anti-establishment time. And not only that, Bill Nelson, he's not a guy who's going to fire up, voter turnout.
He doesn't. He's
especially now that he's older.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is based on turnout. And I know they're kind of hoping for an anti-Trump turnout to sort of get Nelson in there, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk some more about that. We have a couple of minutes left to us yet. We want to remind you that you are listening to the Florida Roundtable. It is a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And you know what, Mike? I'll tease ahead a little bit because we already know who next week's guest is going to be. But you have to come back to find out. Our conversation continues in a moment.
Hi, Darcy the Cow here for Black Cow, the mature manure. Most good gardeners know how to get great results. Sun, water, and fertilizer, along with the right soil. Cow manure is the best way to condition the soil. Black Cow is all natural, and it's the best fertilizer, with 10 times more manure and 10 times more nutrients than the other guys. Pick up the bright yellow bag today.
Black Cow, the mature manure, Black Cow.
A pretty common problem in our area is black and green stuff on outdoor surfaces. You scrub it off and it comes right back. You need something that will keep it clean. Wet and Forget. It keeps surfaces clean for a year or more. Just spray it on and leave it. Make cleaning easier. Pick up a bottle of Wet and Forget today at Lowe's, Walmart, Ace, or visit wetandforget.com to find a store near you.
Florida has over 2,000 miles of shoreline, over 4,000 square miles of lakes, and over 11,000 miles of rivers, streams, and waterways. Which means no matter how big your boat, how bright your life jacket, how loud you shout, finding you in the case of an emergency is going to be really difficult. Unless you have an emergency locator beacon. Odds are you'll never need it. But the odds for you are tremendously better if you ever do.
Learn more about emergency locator beacons at myfwc.com. Brought to you by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Unexpected expenses can hit anyone, and many Floridians turn to small dollar loans to manage those temporary financial challenges. When using a small dollar loan, be sure to choose a state licensed lender. Remember that borrowers have rights under Florida law, including flexible repayment options if you can't repay on time. Make sure you understand the cost and terms of the loan before you borrow, and only borrow what you can afford to pay back. For more information, go to borrowsmartfl.com. This message is brought to you by the Florida Community Financial Services Association.
In a world of tiny tomatoes and backyard pests, one man and his better half dig deep to save backyard gardens.
Joni, stand by to upload expert videos.
Already loaded, Tom.
Wow, you're good.
You're not so bad yourself.
Tom and Joni McCubbin star in hisandhersgardening.com. Critics rave.
Tom and Joni, they really grow on you. 2 green thumbs up.
Don't miss hisandhersgardening.com.
Employ Florida offers resources and services to help you find employment.
Hi, Gary here. Employ Florida helped me improve my interview skills, plus write a great resume. I attended networking events with many employers and other industry professionals just like me. With the workshops and training found at employflorida.com, I was able to land a great job in my field.
Job resources, real results, hired. Employflorida.com. That's employflorida.com.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And we're talking Florida politics here. We've been talking about Rick Scott versus Bill Nelson. One of the things that I wanted to bring up briefly, Michael, was primary night. And they were talking about record turnout and all of that, and the absentee votes and the mail-ins. Now, you know that in Florida, for years, there have been 5, 6, 7, sometimes as high as 700,000 more registered Democrats than there are Republicans, which is kind of incredible that the Republicans control all the
I
statewide
know, right?
offices except Bill Nelson.
Yeah, that's very true. But right now, usually Republicans have better turnouts in midterm elections, off-year elections.
It was the Democrats in the state capitol who shifted these races to the off-year elections, thinking that they would have better chance to turn back the Republicans when the Republicans were winning all the national elections.
Yeah, I think it made it worse for them.
It certainly did. And in this past primary, if you total it up, take all 5 of the Democratic gubernatorial candidates, and their total didn't come out as high as the 2 Republicans.
Wow.
The Republicans were motivated to turn out. So we shall see. The governor's race shaping up interestingly. Andrew Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee, Ron DeSantis, the former congressman from Jacksonville. I think one of the things that some analysts thought was going to be a big explosion kind of went, there is an ongoing FBI investigation and a grand jury convened in Leon County investigating the government of Tallahassee.
Yeah, and they say, and Gillum has said he's not a target of that investigation, but there's been some shady reports about him.
Yeah. They have tried to focus on Scott Maddox, the former statewide Democratic chairman, who is in Tallahassee and all that. And I would guess that even as we speak, they're digging through these files and records that they can get their hands on to see what happens. So who knows? We may have a surprise out of that. But at this point, early on, the governor's race incredibly close.
Yeah, the average of the polls right now has Gillum up on DeSantis by a little under 4 points. That being said, though, the trend is in Gillum's favor. Yeah. So the last poll by Rasmussen has Gillum up by 6.
Well, in order for that to happen, we would have to have, I think, this blue wave that they talk about.
Yeah, we'd have to have a big turnout, I think, for Gillum.
And I'm not convinced that is going to happen in an off-year election. The minorities generally don't turn out, don't motivate as well. The young people, historically, have been the lowest percentage of the 18 to 21 has a horrible voting record.
Well, I think they're kind of going off the Obama strategy. Gillum is an African American, and they're hoping that because of that, maybe they can get out the minority vote because Obama was able to do that.
Yeah.
We'll see if that happens in Florida. It's just hard for me to believe that Gillum could win in a pro-business state like Florida.
Yeah. And we, like you say, it would have to be a very large turnout. And in off-year elections, we can be wrong, but historically it does not happen.
I mean, I will say this: Gillum is a compelling candidate. He's a very
well-spoken.
He's very good speaker. He's very good on the trail. He's very good in debates.
All right. Well, scheduled to be with us next week, national political analyst Rhodes Cook of the Cook Letter. Thank you for your time. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
We'll see you next week on the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to the Florida Roundtable, a news and public affairs presentation of the Florida News Network. The views and opinions expressed during this show are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's management, ownership, or sponsors. Please email your comments to reagansmith@fnnonline.net.